I'm David Salazar. Welcome to a special episode of Most Innovative Companies. You've heard the name of this podcast, but did you know that it borrows its name from Fast Company's flagship recognition program, Most Innovative Companies? Every year, a small army of writers and editors put together our comprehensive list of the businesses shaping the future of their respective industries and industry at large. The list, which came out March 24th online and in our spring issue, includes 720 honorees across 59 categories, all pulled from a combination of applications and the reporting expertise of our contributors. Over these special 3 episodes of Most Innovative Companies, I'll be talking to Fast Company reporters and editors about the process behind crafting lists from 5 industries and talking about standout companies from each. Today, we're talking about food with Fast Company contributor Clint Rainey and about restaurants, dining, and food service with contributor Kristen Hawley. Clint covers the business of food brands, and Kristen focuses on restaurant technology innovation and the future of hospitality via her newsletter, Expedite. Clint, Kristen, welcome.
Great to be joining you, David. Thanks.
Thank you so much for having us.
Before we get into this, I want to hear from you. I know that I personally have gone through the process of getting together a Most Innovative Company list a lot. I personally write usually 1 a year and then oversee 7 or 8 every year as an editor. But I'd love to hear from you. What makes a company stand out as you start to build a list for these industries? What makes a strong applicant? How does the process work?
For restaurants in Most Innovative Companies in the restaurant industry, it's a combination. So innovative, right? What does that mean? It can mean novel, it can mean new, it can mean creative. For me, I really want to make sure that it's impactful, changing the way that people experience restaurants, changing the way that people who work inside restaurants experience, just changing the way that restaurants are perceived or part of the larger ecosystem.
Totally. And how do you view that from the food angle, Clint?
Food is an interesting one, I suppose, because there isn't maybe as much breadth among the applicants with food as there might be in a section like technology, let's say, and we can sort of only have 1, maybe 2 max from a particular subcategory. We can't have, 4 better for you soda brands out of 10 for the year. And so it's a mixture of trying to figure out what categories within food were a big deal in the previous year, and also trying to figure out which companies within that category would be the best representation. Do we want them to be the one to carry the torch for this particular category?
Right. I don't think people think about the amount of thought that goes into these lists, and also the fact that we want them to be really comprehensive, right? So we pull from a pool of applicants who apply via our application site, and also we sort of pull from your reporting, your expertise. How do you sort of balance applications versus what might not have applied, might not know that the program exists, but also sort of were making waves in your industry during the year?
I think in restaurants, this really applies because the restaurant technology business, which I cover very acutely, is really tapped into things like this, to awards and recognitions. The broader hospitality industry is less so. I think that it's easy to sort of associate innovation with technology, especially when we're talking about the future. But there is so much happening in a people-forward business like restaurants, right? So I absolutely start with the applications that come in, which are great and comprehensive, and then I see what's missing. I look for, the companies that I have heard about that restaurants are talking about. I look for categories or verticals that are missing, and I try to make sure that I'm filling in every gap to make sure that every facet of the restaurant industry is covered by this list.
Yeah, and I guess to echo what you said, David, for people who are curious about this process, it's not exactly a quick task, like a quick read through this pool of applicants. I mean, you might have 40, 50, 75 companies in each group, and they all write effectively a short book and self-adulatory corporate speak or whatever, explaining why their companies, they've always been revolutionary and singular among their peers, but especially during the past 12 months. And so you have to go through all of those things, make kind of a list of who's moving on, but then figure out where the holes are and what you want to fill in to make sure you have a comprehensive list. And that, I guess, something that that I think is kind of interesting to note is that this doesn't really happen in a silo either as a judge. Every year I'm getting feedback from top editors and then other judges who just want to make sure that whatever company X is on my radar for doing Y thing this year, the top food company, Row 7, that we'll talk about here in a second, is one that I followed for years, but so had executive editor Amy Farley and editorial director Jill Bernstein. And we were talking about what they had accomplished over the past year and realized that like they probably really needed to be at the very top of food, but they also didn't apply. And so that was kind of an obvious one that I needed to like drag into the group.
It is really a combination of, yes, we're looking for the top applicants. We do spend a lot of time with them, but also, to your point, if there's someone that's really huge in an industry, really making, moving their particular industry forward or even business at large forward, we bring them in. And it really is the result of just being keyed into those industries and making sure that we're experts. So you did mention Row 7, so I'm happy to jump into it. You say you covered them for years. You sort of started looking at them in 2018. That's back when the Koji Nut Squash launched. What made you and Amy and Jill all sort of look at Row 7 and say, this needs to be on the list? Why are we revisiting it now?
Row 7's been selling these sort of, I'll just like near perfect, let's call them near perfect looking vegetables from these special displays in Whole Foods in the produce section for, I don't know, since 2022. I have since then appreciated that they are the work of a group of really smart people active in both food and agronomy. This chef named Dan Barber, who's the owner of Blue Hill at Stone Barns outside of New York City, a woman who worked with him at Blue Hill named Charlotte Douglas, and then a couple of people that are in kind of like the plant breeder agronomy worlds. One of them is this guy at Cornell named Michael Mazurek. Since the debut of those first vegetables, the company has continued adding a larger array of even crazier vegetables. This past year, they introduced, for example, a leek crossed with garlic. Barber calls it the love child of those two. At the start of the year, they unveiled tins of vegetables, kind of a first of its kind offering carried by Whole Foods. I had been to Blue Hill. This was before the pandemic, I guess, was the last time I had gone personally. So before these vegetables were offered at Whole Foods, the restaurant is sort of like the epitome of farm to table, or it was when it began. Their whole thing is insanely delicious, but incredibly simple, oftentimes basically raw vegetables served sometimes even with their stems still attached. And it's an expensive meal. And what the kitchen can do with like simple root vegetables and some salt and olive oil is astounding. But what I learned in looking back at Row 7 now is that those like perfect specimens of vegetables that Blue Hill is serving to guests are the same exact vegetables that Row 7 effectively is selling to grocery shoppers. So if you were like super into the confit sweet garlic hybrid that they several $100 tasting menu, now you can just go to Whole Foods and buy one and cook it at home yourself.
That's fascinating. And so that sort of broad access to both, I guess, just that one restaurant, but probably more restaurants, right? And consumers, that's the result of the business they've built, right? Can you talk a bit about the sort of unique approach that they take there in terms of building a supply chain after they've cultivated a vegetable, right?
Dan Barber's career-long obsession is like just kind of hunting down these incredibly delicious vegetables because, I mean, he'll even say it's like, because I was selfish and I just wanted them for myself for the restaurant. And I think at a point, they realized that there was a way to, he uses the word democratize. I don't know if I would necessarily use that word in this situation, but the premise is that they could expand access to these kind of elite level vegetables. They began with seeds. They were able to sell seeds to not just farmers, but, home gardeners and whatnot too, people who wanted to grow maybe just like a small amount of some carrots or some squash. Barber will go into a 5-minute monologue if you ask him about the modern produce supply chain and how vegetables are being bred by big food, not for flavor, but for durability, disease resistance, higher yield, that sort of stuff. It doesn't necessarily seem like this painstaking, detailed breeding for flavor would be a great business model. But what Row 7 argues is that when you do breed for flavor, that actually requires making the plant be as healthy as possible. And healthy plants are like by nature more durable and more disease resistant and have a higher yield. At one point, he was actually explaining to me that Rose 7 is already found in just the first couple of seasons of doing this, that it's capable of essentially matching the yield of an industrially raised vegetable that might have a half a century and millions of dollars invested in making its yield be optimized.
And so now it's pretty big in retail, right? Can you talk about some of the vegetables it has, mostly in Whole Foods, and how they moved into the sort of tinned vegetables situation?
They don't do fruit. There are a lot of things they don't really do yet. Those things are in the works. I think they will release them if and when they feel like they have something they can add to the produce section. I don't think they're interested in selling apples just because. Right now, it's a mixture of a lot of root vegetables. Barber has like an obsession with squashes. So there's a couple of different kinds of squash. There's a lettuce that came out this past year that's a mixture between romaine and spinach. They have a sweet potato that's extremely purple, very sweet. Yeah, it's a number of these are not just very tasty, but visually, like aesthetically, just really, really interesting to look at. This badger flame beet, that was one of the original items that they first developed. It's a beet that's been bred to not have the sort of dirt taste that's sort of beet haters avoid beets usually for that reason.
I like the dirt.
You do like it? Well, then you have to eat these for a different reason then.
Yeah, fair.
Keep away from the dirt. But this one is orange, and it has like kind of some white swirls through it. So, it's just kind of cool looking.
I mean, obviously, I'm sure these taste amazing fresh or, freshly roasted, whatever. Obviously, then the challenge becomes, how do you make it good in a can? Like, I think when I think about like a canned vegetable, I recognize that like they're as nutritious often as whatever, but like I think about like a sad canned green giant green bean, what is the sort of secret sauce here that lets them can their vegetables in a way that, preserves that freshness, preserves that flavor that Dan Barber sounds like he's so obsessed with?
They have found a way to get access to these vegetables that are so spectacular that they don't need to do anything to them, really. I mean, they're partnering with this co-packer, meaning the place that puts their vegetables into tins. It's up in Massachusetts. It's a company that does tinned fish normally. It does oysters and clams. And so they already had the expertise on how to do that for fish. Row 7 talks them into applying their knowledge to vegetables. This is the first time that they've done this work with vegetables. I think that they do see it as a vegetable preserved at peak flavor during the right season, as opposed to trying to sell you some kind of item that you walk into the store and your first thought is like, wait, that's not supposed to be in season right now. And then it's like, oh, because it comes from Peru or, whatever. And in this case, they would never sell that sort of stuff out of season, but their thinking is, well, what if we just put it into cans so that the consumer can enjoy it out of season, but I suppose more than that. This president of Row 7, Charlotte Douglas, was telling me they themselves have no complaints about how the fresh produce is selling. But when they're demoing it in like Whole Food stores or whatever, customers always come up and say, well, but how do I cook this? Or it's too much work. I don't have time, like that kind of thing. And so they also see these tinned vegetables as a way to give consumers a product that they can effectively just open the top of and dump straight on top of rice or pasta or something like that. So that's like a super fast, easy fix to having a meal.
Interesting. So sort of taking that tinned fish mentality of like, okay, this will just be something to zhuzh up a bowl of sorts, and then this can be the main event, not like a thing in a stir fry or whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
Fascinating. And so where does the business stand?
I guess for the past couple of years have by some measures been doubling in size. They increased their acreage by a little more than double last year, and they say that they're expecting to do the same again this year. The fresh produce is available at Whole Foods. They're still in the process of partnering with growers to get this stuff out as fast as possible. And I think that sometimes means that the thing you could buy in California is maybe not available for that particular week or month on the East Coast. The cans launched in the Northeast only right now, though I assume that they are in the process of trying to figure out how to go nationwide with that. I think the limiting factor for now is the speed that the co-packer can produce tins at. It's a relatively small operation as far as I understand it.
Awesome. Well, I'll, keep an eye out for 07 at my local Whole Foods. And now from something very fresh, we move to something very packaged. Sort of like the packaged product is ketchup. And Kraft Heinz. Kraft Heinz is on the food list this year. They are, in fact, the gold standard of ketchup. I mean, it's one of those things that I think there's this really, it's got to be like 12 years old at this point. This New Yorker thing from like the Shouts and Murmurs when it was good. That's like, we do our own little twist on ketchup. And it's just like a waiter monologuing about how much their ketchup sucks. What got Kraft Heinz, specifically Heinz ketchup, onto the list this year?
You said gold standard, which I guess is a good jumping off point. I would say that Heinz ketchup it's not merely the gold standard. It's almost like the Kleenex or Jell-O or Band-Aid or something of condiments, right? It's like when someone picks up a bottle of ketchup, they just expect it to be Heinz. I think what Kraft was after was a way of demonstrating that this omnipresent ketchup bottle that people see everywhere is also adaptable. It gets done riffs before, right? There's organic Heinz out there.
Mm-hmm.
But this was a more serious rethinking of the recipe, sort of reformulating it, switching out some of the ingredients so that it's both healthier, but also very different in terms of what it removed was the sugar and added salt, but it still needs to taste like Heinz in the end. Heinz ended up doing was launching 2 different reformulations, each one tailored to a different geographic market. Unfortunately, neither of these was in the United States, so it was impossible to try them. But in Europe, they introduced something called the Heinz Zero, which is a version that has no added sugar or salt at all. So, they could have done that in a number of different ways, I suppose. They could have replaced sugar with some sort of substitute to give it the same level of sweetness. But what they did instead was basically double down on the tomato content. They used a third more tomatoes, and tomatoes have naturally some sugar in them. And so that boosted the sweetness without having to add anything else to the product. And they also discovered in the process of doing that, it imparted a deeper umami flavor than you would find in original Heinz ketchup. And I suppose that could be sort of a give or take thing depending on the customer as to whether they would want their ketchup to have a deeper umami flavor, but it probably gets people to at least give it a try. And that rolled out across, I think it's 10 of the markets in Europe this past year. Kraft has said that it's done pretty well. In the Netherlands, supposedly currently accounts for 1 in every 9 bottles of ketchup that are sold.
Yeah, it's Heinz so fascinating. I spoke with their CMO for a piece that was in our winter issue, and they are actually doing so much around just rethinking that main product. And, it sounds like Europe isn't the only market where they did it, right? They finally listened to the comments on their Instagram. People said, come to Brazil. And so they took the reformulation to Brazil too, right?
Yeah, Brazil got its own version. Kraft Heinz has been using this AI tool for a while, or rather, I should say that Kraft Heinz has been celebrating this AI tool that it invented for a while. It calls it Leonardo. It said to identify specific consumer preferences for those 2 markets. Leonardo told them that Brazilians would maybe not be super into a no sugar, no salt Heinz, that they would respond better to a ketchup that had less sugar and salt, but not no sugar, no added sugar and salt. So they got one that reduced the quantities of both by 1/3. Kraft said that it sold pretty well as well. They saw double-digit market share growth since the introduction. And they put this in the context as well of the amount of sugar and salt that it removed from sort of like Brazil's collective diet. They talked about removing over 10,000 tons of both of those things collectively from the diet in the country, which is I guess that's a lot.
Do you know if they have plans to bring any of this to the US? I know that the organic is in a lot of even food service like Burger King, Wendy's, etc. But I know that there are a lot of people in the US. My roommate buys the saddest ketchup in the world. It's like the Heinz no added salt. But if that were sort of like a flagship product, it would feel less like a specialty thing, I think.
I don't know the answer to that, but I think that it's fair to assume they are looking into expanding that offering to as many markets as possible. Like an interesting side note about all of this is that they've said that those reformulations, because there are fewer ingredients, are cheaper to produce. Just in these two markets across that part of the globe that has this product available to them, it reduced the cost by enough that it lowered the overall production cost of Heinz ketchup, the whole brand, by like 3%. Just like, that's a pretty good amount.
It's really lovely on MIC when you have a company that's like, everyone's heard of them, but like their scale really enables them to do something. When they make a change, they're doing something really interesting. And in this case, it's not just a product innovation story, right? It is, but it's also a technology innovation story using the AI to take the customer insights and say, using the AI to inform that product innovation, and then looking at how that product innovation can affect their entire supply chain and their overall costs, which at their scale is significant. It's a really impressive little pick here in just like Kraft Heinz. You know, people might not think twice about Kraft Heinz as a mass business, but there's really a lot of internal innovation that this shows off.
Yeah, totally.
We'll be right back after a quick break. Thanks, Clint. Now, Kristen, we turn to you to talk about restaurants, dining, and food service. And the first one we're going to talk about is actually one that maybe not everyone's familiar with, but is really doing some cool stuff in the world of like convenience. And that is QuikTrip. What can you tell us about QuikTrip?
First of all, if you live in the Midwest, you're definitely familiar with QuikTrip. 1,200 location gas station convenience store, over 50 years old. Still majority owned by the children of the founders, which I think is pretty cool. But the coolest thing, and the reason that they're on the list this year, is because they have completely revamped their beverage program in an era when there is a lot of attention on, I would say, premium coffee, Starbucks, for example.
Right.
Where Starbucks is trying to create a destination where people will linger. You know, they have these new chairs now. They have these coffee mugs. The CEO is very excited about the coffee mugs.
And we've written about the chairs.
Yeah. I was in the audience when Brian Nichols, Starbucks CEO, was discussing the chairs. Anyway, QuikTrip, the convenience chain, is recognizing that people still drink lattes in their car.
Yeah.
And people want high quality lattes that they can drink in their car. They call this a bevolution. I'm making air quotes.
It's a great tagline. So what is part of the bevolution? What is, they're bringing, it's high quality, sort of good, like barista quality coffee for the road warrior?
Yeah, I mean, effectively, that is the answer. They have developed this really awesome tap system. It looks like beer taps. It looks like a brewery. 6 hot, 6 cold, self-serve, fully self-serve.
Hot taps?
Yeah, so you can self-serve yourself a latte from the tap. They wouldn't tell me how they make it. I had a lot of questions about how you make a self-serve latte. QuikTrip has a corporate chef, and he declined to share any intel about how to make a latte on tap. I am married to a Kansas City native, and I have tapped his entire family to check the quality of these lattes on tap to make sure that I wasn't recommending a poor product. And I can say with authority that they're sourcing excellent quality coffee beans. They are taking a lot of care into the way that these are presented and the way that they taste in a way that competes with premium coffee destinations.
That's so fascinating. At Dunkin' now, they have the taps, and that makes it a little faster for the baristas, but I've never seen hot coffee on tap or even like a latte on tap outside of like a cold nitro situation.
Mm-hmm. They have those too.
That's impressive. What has been the effect on QuikTrip's business? How has it impacted demand, and are people buying these?
People are buying them. As I said, it's a privately held company, so not too much visibility into sales numbers. They are very excited about this bevolution, as they call it, which extends past coffee. There's a new tea machine. QuikTrip takes a lot of pride in its tea, and this tea machine can brew hot and iced tea to specific temperatures based on the ideal brewing temperature for a particular tea. And it's customizable. You can add lemon and sweetener to taste. Also self-serve. Also very quick. I think those are not quite fully installed, but they should be very soon. Forbes' list of top private companies said that in 2024, QuikTrip generated almost $20 billion in revenue. So adding a premium beverage program on top of that, I would imagine, is going to drive those numbers higher.
Right. And they also sell gas, right? Like they're a gas station primarily.
It's a gas station. Yeah.
So, I mean, you're not making margin on petroleum. You're going to make margin on the coffee, right?
As a restaurant expert, my gut would be yes, but I cannot
Right. You
speak
can't
to petroleum margins.
I'm speaking broadly. Yeah. Like.
Yeah, I think, yes, there is margin to be had in food, and there's margin to be had in quality food, right? And the fact that they can tap into quality ingredients, they have a corporate chef who's thinking about how to make these foods and beverages taste really good in a way that can be served quickly and conveniently will make a big difference. And they're actually, QuikTrip has some new stores, and they're almost like prototypes that have a much bigger kitchen footprint in order to increase F&B output for the road warriors, as you said.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of a beautiful thing that like this innovation and sort of yes, Starbucks has made insane inroads in places like the Midwest, but like this is still something that actually fits into some people's mornings much better than like a Starbucks, say. And I'm from Santa Fe, so when I go home, I'll try out a drive-through Starbucks, and like that is kind of terrible. Like it takes as long as if you'd gone in, but I think that like baking this into a person's routine seems really good, and that they're taking such an innovative approach in a way that you often are only seeing coming out of like Silicon Valley, and not in a way that feels like so focused on automation in the way that a lot of Silicon Valley stuff. It's like operational efficiency, but it's not necessarily like removing people from the equation, right?
Yeah, and I want to be clear, like self-serve beverages at gas stations is not new. I've been mixing Slurpees since I was 7, and that was a lot of years ago. But I think the way that, as you say, the way that they are considering what convenience and quality can be and using technology and human labor, there's still humans that work inside of QuikTrips to serve their customers as quickly as possible and conveniently is a really smart move, especially in the current restaurant industry climate.
How does this play into their larger, if you can speak to their larger like food and beverage operation?
The promise of a really good, affordable, quick coffee beverage will bring you in the front door.
Yes.
There's a reason to walk through the door. And then perhaps you see a lot of the other offerings. I think beverages will drive business. I think that it plays into, as I said, the larger strategy of offering convenient, high quality food and beverage items, competing with fast food, competing with Starbucks, competing with restaurants, other convenience stores, and fast food.
You can grab a taquito to dunk in the latte.
You probably could. You probably could.
Sounds horrible,
I'll have to check
though.
that out.
Sounds terrible. Great. Well, yeah, that's really exciting. I'm so glad that we have QuikTrip on there. If I'm ever in the Midwest, I will have to go check it out. Pull a pint, as it were, from the coffee tap. So from a pretty well-trafficked and multi-location chain, we moved to Shia, which is a 22-seat nonprofit restaurant in D.C. That's really small. Can you tell us why it's on the list? What does that tell us? What are they doing that is sort of driving the future of full-service dining?
I'm so excited about this one. I am fairly positive that it is the first single location independent restaurant that has appeared on the restaurants list in Most Innovative Companies.
Big milestone.
Yeah, I've been hoping to do it for a couple of years now, and I'm glad that I found the right restaurant. But what it is, Shia it's a small restaurant. It's not trying to be small. It's trying to be replicable. So it's nonprofit. It was founded by Chef Edward Lee and the Lee Initiative, which is an industry nonprofit, very highly regarded in the restaurants. And it's a research lab of sorts trying to prove out a thesis that restaurants can operate with a close to zero plastic, zero waste, zero gas restaurant without completely collapsing financially.
Wow.
Yeah, tall order, very important, talked about a lot in restaurant circles. Mm-hmm. But what Shia is doing is running these experiments, we'll call them, in their own kitchen. The first one was to eliminate plastic. Mm-hmm. And then they are publishing their results with actionable steps that any restaurant can take that also wants to reduce plastic. The plastics one is interesting because they identified a bunch of common plastics in the kitchen, from like, the plastic wrap that goes around like food as they're prepping it to like broom handles.
Oh. And
they suggested alternatives that they have tested themselves, and also did a cost analysis of what it would cost to fully replace these items. And what a restaurant can do is download this report. It's available free to anyone. I mean, you can download it if you're interested. Figure out how they can responsibly replace, in this instance, plastic in their kitchen, how much it will cost, and what the eventual impact of that is.
Wow. So what was the impact of the pilot on plastic?
In the first 7 months, Shia estimated that it prevented between 229 and 351, very exact numbers, kilograms of plastic waste from entering landfills. And so, multiply that out across how many independent restaurants that might adapt this, or just even a portion of these, what I would call best practices for the future of restaurants, and it can make a real difference. The thing that I really appreciate about the way that this restaurant is going about making these changes is the documentation and the way that they are taking these really big, scary ideas like zero plastic. Oh my gosh, how are we ever going to do that as a business? And saying like, look, this is how we did it. This is what it costs us. This is how you can do it.
Besides plastic, what has Shia taken a look at in terms of waste and consumption?
So now they're focusing on energy use, measuring the energy that it takes to produce their tasting menu, which changes monthly. They're publishing these results they're putting them on the menu. So a guest can understand, the energy usage that was tied to their particular tasting menu. It varies month to month, and they are finding seasonal ways to reduce energy usage. It has to do with what ingredients they're using and how they're preparing them. It has to do with how many dishes are a part of the tasting menu. Really, it's just they're trying to tie energy usage to cost, to waste, to helping the diners understand the absolute true cost of their meal, not just beyond $0.01.
Yeah, that's exciting, right? I think about this a lot when I watch Kitchen Nightmares, right? Like a lot of people just like operate restaurants and kind of have no clue what they're doing. And also like, even if you know what you're doing when you're running a restaurant, you all sort of operate in a silo. And it's not like, unless you're part of a chain or a restaurant group, you're not getting these best practices from your fellow restaurateurs unless you're like building that community. So like, it's really fascinating to have these reports. Are they making inroads with restaurants? What are some of the partnerships they've made? How are they getting this out to people?
Their big partnership is through OpenTable, the reservations provider, also on the MIC list this year. OpenTable has a vast network of restaurants. They support a lot of restaurant changes, innovation. So they're pushing it out. For me, I understand that this list is about impact, and I can't tell you yet how many restaurants are adapting these practices. But what I can tell you is that these are things that restaurants want to do, independent restaurants want to do. And like you said, there's a dearth of information. They're mostly moving too fast. They're trying to just pay their rent. And they maybe don't have time to think about this. So a bulleted 10-point list, say, of ways to reduce plastic in your kitchen is a super, super actionable way to do it. So here's hoping that it can be distributed farther and wider, and that restaurants will actually adapt these practices for a better future for the business.
Totally. And in the same way that like talking about Kraft Heinz with Clint is a look at how a massive company can sort of, still drive innovation in unique ways. I think that another beautiful part of most innovative companies, the program, is to make bets on these early and new efforts that really have serious potential and have made, have results of sorts from a smaller thing, right? Like as we build these lists, I think there's probably a little lower down on the list, right? I think we reserve those spots typically for things that are scaling, not scaled entirely, but that have real promise and show real innovative thinking. That's why these lists are really feel comprehensive, right? We have the early stuff. We have something like Shia where it is, if they can do it, it will be so impactful, and they're already making serious steps to make it happen.
Yeah, I think that this, 22-seat restaurant can be just as innovative and game-changing as the $75 billion delivery company that is also on the MIC list this year.
Totally.
No shade to the delivery companies.
Awesome. Well, yeah, that was the last of the companies we want to talk about. Clint and Kristen, thank you so much for joining me. And thanks for all the work you did on Most Innovative Companies this year.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, David.
That's it for this special episode of Most Innovative Companies. Thanks again to my guests. You can check out the entire list of Most Innovative Companies, again, 720 honorees, 59 categories, at fastcompany.com. Until next time, I'm David Salazar.